Welcome to the Firepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff McDowell Jr.
And I'm Bennett Grove.
Between us, we have 20 years of firefighting experience.
And over 15 years of experience building, growing, and leading small businesses.
Each episode, we get after it by discussing leadership, life, and development.
We'll also unpack the wins and losses that we've experienced along the way.
You ready, big dog?
I'm ready, my man.
Let's get it.
Welcome to another Firepreneurs Podcast. We are here today with the one and only Kedma Ough. So we are doing the Beginning with the End in Mind series. This episode is going to be targeted, no pun intended, on funding your startup and funding your growth. Kedma, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I can't leave it at that, Kedma. We have to do a better intro than that. Because like when you come on board, it's kind of like having
I can talk about it. You can just say, I can talk about, I can do my own intro if it's easier.
Well, or I can give you like a Michael Buffer style.
Whatever works.
So like you just walked into the octagon and it's like out of this corner.
That's
we
right.
have standing
That's right.
from Portland, Oregon.
That's
the
right.
small business champion. Some call her a superwoman. Some call her the funding guru. Kedma Ough.
Yes. Whatever works.
I'm going to go with that because I'm a nerd and I like
you. Okay.
So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm excited. So where do we begin?
Well, so the premise of this series that we did is called Beginning with the End in Mind. And so we're kind of trying to go along this journey as if you just started a company.
Yeah.
And you're a firefighter and you're looking to start a side hustle, or maybe you've already started a side hustle. And so we're trying to start from beginning where how do you think with at the end in mind? And then going into the first episode of the series, we had an attorney on about forming your company and protecting your brand once you've formed your company. And so now we're kind of, okay, we've got the LLC started. We've got the idea of what our end looks like from a company formation standpoint. Now, how do we get the ball rolling? And that's kind of where we're talking about funding the startup.
Perfect. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's dig in. So first question I have for you in all your background is, how in the heck did you get into funding and how did you become the guru of funding for the small business champions out there?
Yeah, that is such a great question because in my line of work, you could just go on to LinkedIn or Google and you're going to find thousands and thousands of people who say they do this. And some are great and some are scary, right? So it's really important to really understand where you're getting information. First of all, I want to say, Bennett, I'm a 5th generation entrepreneur. So I feel like I was hustling when I was born, right? So I came from an environment like that, but I really got my background when I was hired through the Small Business Administration, which everyone knows really supports small business around the entire U.S. I was first hired to manage the Women's Business Center, which is a subset of the SBA. There are 3 arms. There's Women's Business Center. There is SCORE, which you've probably heard of, retired executives. I like to say I'm still too young for that, who give back. And the Small Business Development Centers, which is the big gorilla in the room. They have over 10,000 advisors. And I was also a director at the SBDC. So I've had 15 years on and off working for the SBA. But where I really got my funding, people think, was it your education? No. Was it your career? Not really. It was from a situation where I had to file bankruptcy, which sometimes shocks people, but we all sometimes face a crisis and have to figure it out. So I learned the hard way what it was like to come from no money, losing everything, and having to start all over again. And essentially it took me about 15 years in research, but I reverse engineered how to find money, how to track money, how to leverage money. And today I spend my life teaching people how to win the game of financing at any level with any situation that they are dealing with.
That's awesome. We talk about, and we talk about this in the intro of this podcast, is wins and losses. And you took what might otherwise be perceived as a loss and turned it into a huge win. I'm reading the book right now as Tim Tim Ferriss's Tribe of Mentors.
Yes.
And he asks like 100 entrepreneurs these questions. And he said, what was the biggest failure that impacted you? And like, it's just fascinating, those stories, how people take a loss and turn it into a huge win. And so like, that's kind of one of your losses that you turned into this huge win.
Yes. And I actually have a story around Tim Ferriss I have to just quickly share for the audience.
Course.
So one of Tim Ferriss's biggest mentors was a gentleman called Stephen Key. If you want to look at his first book, 4-Hour Work Week, he actually communicates in the book about Stephen and how he helped him. And Stephen was also my mentor. So prior to launching the book, I was just doing what entrepreneurs do, procrastinating, right? I didn't have time. I couldn't do it. Well, Stephen was so frustrated that one day he literally went online and stole my name. Okay. So www.Kedma Ough, he held as ransom. Okay. And I was like, Stephen, that is my name. He's like, yeah, I know it's your name. Well, why do you have it? Well, you got to do the book. When you do the book, I'll sell you your name back. So we ended up selling my name back for $1. Okay. And so, so I am kind of 1 degree away from Tim Ferriss because Stephen actually wrote the foreword to my book. And so it really speaks to who you surround yourself with and then your willingness to just take initiative. So I just had to share that story.
That's an awesome story. I love that he held it ransom too. Like, so did that, did it really like shift your motivation when he did that?
Totally. I was like, every day I woke up and I'm like, my name is taken. Somebody owns my name. Like, I can't go and just change my name. It was like a big deal for me, but it fired me up to say, okay, I'm going to get my name back. So he did it really in good faith, but it definitely did motivate me.
Well, speaking of motivation, I think that's a good segue to,
you
are like partly responsible for why I'm sitting in this table in front of this camera with this background behind me. Still like working my way through doing a podcast here because you would push and encourage me and other people in our group. So Kedma is my business coach and used to always push us to like, you just don't know. She used to say to us, you don't know who you might impact with your story. And
it's so true.
Storytelling and just that one person that might impact you and change your trajectory. And for me, that was combination of you, and I listened to Josh Latimer's podcast, and then from Josh Latimer learned about some of Brandon's stories when he would do his System Saturdays video. So it's just so true how like one person's story can lead you down this road. And then here you are on this podcast talking about Tim Ferriss's book, what I'm reading right now, and it was a business coach connects you guys. It's just the loops are funny.
Yeah. And actually speaking to that, for people who are thinking, where do I put my brand? Because this is all about startup. Don't be afraid to be who you really want to be and own it. When I started this journey, and as you know, I'm probably the only coach in the country that wears a cape on stage. And I have to tell you, Bennett, when I came out and sort of wear this cape as a place of being different, a lot of my colleagues looked at me and said, she is just simply mad. Like, this is never going to work. Well, this is such a gimmick. And literally in a year, I went from being not known on LinkedIn to 35,000 people following me. And it was no studio, no sexy camera. It was just an iPhone and 3-minute videos, but I was authentic. I stayed true to my brand and I stayed true to my audience. And because of that, they came back over and over again. So when I push people to do what you're doing right now, it's because that's what people want these days. They don't want to have famous people talking to them. No disrespect to Tim Ferriss. They want everyday people who have done it that they can trust.
It's one of the parallels that I was just thinking about as you were telling that was that's so true about business too. So stay true to who you are with your company. So if you're a firefighter and you're cutting grass or you're doing handyman work, like you stay true to who you are providing the service. You're authentic. You use integrity, character, and then you get your customers and then you treat them the same each time, and you'll build a business over time just by being consistent. Sorry, I got off on a tangent there, but
no, but it was an important one because here's what I want everyone to hear loud and clear. When we start a business, we're chasing gurus. And I see it all the time, Bennett. People are like, oh, I need to listen to this podcast. Oh, I need to read this book. Oh, I need to follow someone. And they're literally collecting gurus, like 7, 8, 9, 10, 15. But they have to at some point do the work and say, okay, what do I want to represent? How do I want to show up? So I think that this is not a tangent. It's really important, because when you start your company, it's not just cutting grass. It's why should I work with you and you happen to cut grass? That's the difference.
Right. Okay, so now we're firefighters. we're taking in all this wisdom. And I'm like, okay, I'm doing it. I'm motivated right now. I'm going to go do it.
Yep.
So I'm starting my business. I listened to the previous episode. I know how to form the business.
Yes.
So I have to buy the service truck. I got to buy the mowers. I got to buy, all the equipment. I got to, pay for the marketing materials to get started. So I went to a bank, but they don't want to fund any of the working capital. So the working capital being like, something you might spend on door hangers or Google ads or something to that effect, right? So then they will only fund the truck and the mower, or what they call the assets. So are there any other alternative funding options for a startup when we want to fund working capital?
A ton. So there is. So what I want to do is I want to step back, Bennett, and I want to do a little bit of education. I think this is going to really play into this example. But if I don't teach a few things, then it's not going to serve your firepreneurs. So let me do that. I'm going to quickly throw up a slide because it's easier for people to follow. If you're not following, you're going to get to listen to my voice anyway. But if you don't mind, let me just bring you into my world. So let's do that. So for people who don't know, I literally wrote the book on it. Can you see this? Can you see anything? Can you see a slideshow?
It's not coming through.
Okay, hold on a minute. Let's see if I can share. I'm going to share. How's that? 1 second. And I need to just put it into, let me just put it into a format that we can follow. Okay. All right. Can you see this?
We got it.
Okay. So last year I wrote the book Target Funding with the help of McGraw-Hill, one of the 5 leading publishers in the US. And the reason I wrote that is my role, this is business related only, is to teach people how to find money. I'm going to answer your question, but I want to first be able to do that. So are you able to see the whole screen, or do I have to lessen it or anything? Are we good?
We got it now.
Yes, perfect. Okay. So here's what you need to know, Bennett, for anyone listening.
Okay.
Target funding is literally targeting it. It's not just throwing a dart and hope it hits. It's having a strategy so that when you go ahead and go after money, you have a system in place. Now, I'm going to put you on the spot. What is target marketing?
Target marketing for me is once you find your customer avatar, or you find your customer base that is consistent, you focus on targeting those customers repeatedly rather than throwing it out at the wide audience of customers.
Perfect. That's the same thing we do with target funding. Instead of saying, you know what, we have 7, 8, 10, 15, 20 options, we identify the right strategy and we go after that and we put everything to the side. So we follow that same format. So the way I look at it, and we're going to get to your question, I want everyone to imagine that in the example of that cutting grass, that you may end up needing to start your company with $75,000. Instead of going to one lender, one option, one resource, we're going to treat it like it's a pizza pie, and we're going to have slices, right? So 12 slices in a pizza pie, we're going to have 12 potential strategies. The reason we do this is the goal is to mitigate the risk in what you're trying to establish for your company. And when you're going to one lender or one resource, that is not conducive for mitigating your risk. So that's the second thing I want everyone to remember. The third thing I want everyone to remember, and we're going to get to your answer, is every single funding source, Bennett, that any firepreneur wants to look at has variables. So let's look to here below. I'm going to give you an example. What city and state are you located in, Bennett?
Indianapolis, Indiana.
Perfect. I can tell you right now, I will bet everything that I can go into Indianapolis, Indiana right now, and I can find funding specifically for your demographic area, right? Specifically for that geographic area, which may be very, very different than someone who's in Miami, Florida, or someone who is in New York, New York. I can also look at demographics. So you may have firepreneurs who identify because they've served in the military, or maybe they are women-owned firepreneurs, but maybe there's something there that ties to funding that we can go after. Business size generally is 500 employees or less for any small business. And here's the stage we're going to look at, startup stage, startup a business. Tell me about the industries. Typically, what industries are firepreneurs going into? Is it just home services, or is it health? Is it technology? Have you seen any range in terms of the industries they touch?
So I would tell you that based on my 17 years and knowing different people who have side hustles in the fire service, that 90% or more are going to be home services. So there may be some guys that do something different, or girls that do something different, maybe have business selling t-shirts or wares or what have you. But for the most part, it's people who are doing something on the side, like a handyman or cutting grass, something to that effect.
Perfect. So then that's a place where we would continue to look at. And then we have other things like new innovation, new concepts, mission. Mission is really big. And then the impact. So those are kind of the variables I live and breathe in. And these are just examples, because we're going to talk a little bit about funding, but this is just an example.
I thought we were going to talk about chess, because that looks like fun.
Exactly.
Too.
I love chess. But this is a really important slide. And I'll tell you quickly why. Most people, when they're starting their business, inevitably, I don't think you did this, but they'll go online and they'll key in the word grant. Did you ever do that when you started your company? Did you ever say, let me see what I can do for any business grants?
I didn't, honestly.
Okay, so consider yourself an outlier and very rare. The majority of people do that, but what's really cool about this slide is every single item below that actually represents a grant of some sort. And the lesson here is grants are tied to keywords. Just like when you had that legal attorney, if you had an intellectual property attorney and he was looking at some kind of patents, grants are tied to keywords, patents are tied to keywords. So something to pay attention to when you're thinking about different funds. Okay, one last slide and then we're going to get to your answer. This is a little screenshot of all the areas that I play into. PPP and EIDL has been really popular for businesses this year. I'm sure you got at least one of those. You either got PPP or EIDL or both. Is that correct?
Yes, PPP, Paycheck Protection Program. We had a PPP loan that came in.
Did you get EIDL?
No, we got so we applied for the initial 10,000 and we got that, which was that was in the early stages where you could apply and immediately get that. And so
perfect.
We applied for both of those once the COVID started popping off.
Perfect. So here's an example where the entire year has been spent on people talking about PPP and EIDL. But Bennett, for people listening, that's only one small circle in all funding. It's just disaster relief. That's it. The other ones are areas we can play in. And when you ask the question on the graphs we're going to get to, a lot of times we look at traditional. That's lines of credit, equipment financing, vehicle financing, credit card, merchant card, right? Business loans. That's all in the traditional realm. And that's outside of any other funding that we may be getting that is not tied to traditional. Okay. Now, let's get to, let's get to your question. I had to sort of give this brief explanation so we can get to it. Now, you said to me that they're planning service truck and mowers and equipment, marketing material, and the bank said no, except to fund the truck and mower. What else can we do? If I was working with them, I would say first, we don't want to exclude something called the IDA program. It is a special program through the government that if you qualify, if your household qualifies, you will get a match for starting your business. And the match depends on the organization, but it could be as high as 5-to-1 match. So let me give you an example. If you're in a community, let's say Indianapolis, and you qualify, again, it's based on household income. Okay. So if you qualify, that means everyone in your household qualifies as long as they're over the age of 14. That means the spouse can qualify, kids can qualify. The 5-to-1 match means you, Bennett, start putting away in this match savings. Let's say you commit to putting, I don't know, a total of $3,000 towards paying for your marketing materials.
Okay.
That organization will match you 5-to-1.
So this is the IDA.
That is correct. So with $3,000, you get matched 5-to-1. You walk away with $15,000 plus your $3,000. That's $18,000, but it's restricted because you have to spend it on something related to improving or starting or growing your business. And you do not have to repay it back. So when we think about starting with a business, I'm always looking at 4 legs. One of those legs is obviously going to be grants. The second thing I'm going to look at is, can we establish some kind of line of credit? So, you can't get a loan, that's fine, but can we establish a small line of credit that allows you to pay for some things that initially you need? The third thing I would look at, I would not rule out, is the 7A through SBA. It's sometimes difficult for startups to get it because they have to show some type of collateral, but I don't exclude it. And the last one is my favorite because I have literally access to over 50 alternative lenders around the country that do everything from startup to people who have poor credit or people who have collateral issues. So we can get them in business to make money and repay it back. So there's a lot of options with this example.
So when you talked about the IDA, can you just give us what that acronym stands for?
Yes, it stands for Individual Development Account. And it's a hand up, not a handout. It was developed by the government because the government went and interviewed everyday Americans and said, hey, how are you doing this week in terms of finance? And the average American said, I'm broke. And they would go back and they would survey them over and over again, and the same answer would come out. And that's why they developed this program. It's an incredible program that allows everyday Americans to tap into funding, but it doesn't require a payback.
That's a lot to unpack, Kedma.
I know. And I the rest of the examples are going to go much smoother, but if I didn't give you that framework, it would have been a little bit difficult.
And I'll just speak a little bit about my journey, which is, a lot of things I talk about are our wins and losses. So, to fund our startup, we did go and get a loan for a truck. So we bought a dump truck, and this is with my business partner that I started the company with. And so we scratched together our savings. And we put 20% down on the truck. We bought it for like $18,000, I think. So we put 20% down on the truck, and we had about $4,000 left to spend on marketing materials, a couple polos. So we had to do the bootstrap, because that money went super fast. And then
exactly.
Then it's out there dropping door hangers and funding your growth with sweat equity. So my personal journey was that we bought a truck, financed it, and then the rest of it came out of savings, and we just had to make it work. Doing the bootstrap.
And I would tell you, Bennett, that 99% of clients do that, but there's an alternative.
Yeah.
That's where I love to be. If there's a way where I say, you know what, we just found $7,000 for you. It takes away that stress of putting everything, the burden on savings or credit cards.
Yeah. Okay. So now we talked about starting. Now we're going to talk. I want to get you to give us your perspective on this scenario. So now, maybe you're already in business. You've been jamming for a year or two, starting to get some customers in the neighborhood that know you, and they're starting to pass your name along. And so now you're like, hey, this is great. We're getting busy. But now you're starting to do what we've been talking about with this series, which is begin with the end in mind. And maybe you, Mr. Firepreneur or Mrs. Firepreneur, are thinking that I want to keep building the business, but I don't want to be the one performing the work anymore. I want to build it to a size where I can manage the company. And so now we're talking about growing it out of like maybe stage 1 or stage 2, maybe getting into that stage 3 range where you are managing the operation but not performing the work. And so that can be a big leap for somebody. So I got a couple questions here for you.
Let's go.
If I am thinking about scaling or growing the company to a size where I'm just managing the team members doing the work and I want to fund that growth, what advice would you give me on funding the growth? Should I go slow and steady, thereby funding the growth with profit? Or should I consider investing in equipment and financing some of that equipment and then taking on what the big bad word of debt to do the growth?
Okay.
Ooh, that's a big question.
I would say I would do a hybrid, but I'm very methodical. I'm a conservative consultant. And what I mean by that is there has to be a reason by why we're spending, and it has to make sense. If, for example, you're going to invest in more debt, and we're going to talk at some point with good debt versus bad debt, but that additional debt is going to convert into 5 times or more in sales, then I'm going to say, yes, we want to do that as long as we have a budget that sees how that scales up. So we have to first understand, what are we trying to use our money for? If, for example, the use of the money is to invest in training for our staff, and as a result of that training, we reduce our callbacks from 5% to 1%, I'm going to say that is worth our decision for training. So first thing I'm going to try to figure out is, what the heck are we spending our money for?
Right.
That's the first thing. And then I want to know, if we spend the money, what do we get in return? So sometimes when I'm dealing with people who say, I don't want to spend the money because I'm afraid of letting go, then we look at other things happening in the company. Here's an example. Today, I worked with a client. I coached a client who has about $25,000 in current credit card debt, with the average credit card of 15%. Okay. Yeah. However, they have about $40,000 sitting in their account that they can spend, but they were afraid to spend it because they want to have the cash available. So what they're doing is paying 15% on credit card. I did not go into any loans. Here's what I said. I said, hey, by the way, do you have any accounts receivable that I need to be looking at? They said, yes, but I'm not sure what. So we went literally to their QuickBooks, looked at their accounts receivable. Bennett, they have $40,000 in AR that's sitting there that they haven't gone after.
Oh boy. Time to go out there and knock on some doors.
Right. And I said, why didn't you go after it? Because they feel bad. They don't want to, they don't want their customer to be upset. They don't want to lose their customers. They don't have the system. So instead of just running around, that growth was, we're going to get that money,
right,
and pay, right? So there is no short answer. What I would say to you is that I am not someone who puts all the chips in. I am very clear about mitigating our risk. And so I don't believe in going so slow that we lose market share, but I don't believe in going so fast that we lose our underwear. That's it.
Right.
So I would say that first we want to look at what's working, and then we decide what we need in order for that to grow, as long as we have the metrics to meet it.
Yeah, these are super tough questions, because a lot of times the answers are going to be, it depends. Like you were just talking about, it's always going to be contextual to that individual situation.
So, it really does depend. Yeah.
There's no like easy button on these kinds of questions.
No.
So one thing you touched on, I think is important in seeing the people that I know that do own businesses, and myself and my journey, is that it goes back to our very first episode, which is beginning with knowing your whys, and then coupling that with beginning with the end in mind. That's going to help you make the decisions on what type of risk you take. I think it is important, though, to point out, and I'd love to get your feedback on this, that if you're going to go into business at some point, you will have to do something that is uncomfortable or risky, because that is where growth is going to happen, whether it's personal growth or business growth. But I feel like there are these moments where you have to take risks. It doesn't necessarily mean debt though, right?
Right. So here's where I put risk.
Okay.
If I interview someone, and I've worked with over 10,000 entrepreneurs. If I interview someone and someone says to me, Kedma, I do not want to take risk. This is my next comment to them. Bennett, what I heard is you do not want to take risk. Is that correct? Bennett says, yes. Okay, Bennett. Well, here's what I recommend. I recommend you actually not start your business and you go get a job. That's the only way I can guarantee that no risk is involved.
So you were talking about Bennett J. Grove the fifth, right? Because Bennett J. Grove the second doesn't have that problem, the risk part,
Right, but I'm using you as an example, right? Otherwise, what I then tell them is I say we all have a variance of risk appetite. Here's my example. If Bennett was an inventor and he came to me tomorrow and says, I have a brand new invention, it's a brand new parachute. If you're going to, go out and just do some kind of parachute, and you're going to try it out. I usually ask, Bennett, what's the success rate? If you said 50 to 55% of the time it opens up, I would probably say I'll try it because my risk appetite is a bit higher than most people.
That's a bit high.
Right. Most people would say, Bennett, come back to me when you're at 95 to 99%, right? So what we want to remember from that is we all have risk appetite. And also I want to make sure we're really clear here. Your risk appetite may be different than your spouse's. Please, please, please make sure if you're starting your business that you are clear with your spouse or partner what your risk appetite is, because I have seen too many situations go awry because we have imbalance in the risk. Yeah. So that's where I would go.
Man, that's so good too. So I read a book. It's by Joel Salatin, which he's a pastured poultry farmer. So I'm a little off topic here, but he wrote about vision and farming. And farming is a business, and it's a small business. And there might even be firepreneurs that want to become farmers. I know a couple that I worked with personally. But he says that with your farm to be successful, you and your spouse have to have a shared vision. And
Absolutely.
And if you're passionate about it and your spouse is not passionate about it, you're in a recipe for disaster. And I think that also has to do with risk, because in other words, putting it a different way, if you are risk averse and your other spouse is risk taking, then there's going to eventually be conflict. And so then this kind of ties into funding. So if you're using the savings of your marriage's savings account to take this risk and your spouse does not share your vision, it could easily become a catastrophic situation. So funding your startup can be complicated from that side too.
Let me bring this home real clear. These are all true stories. I just recently worked with a client who has been in business for 8 years. Okay. They were actually wanting to meet with me because they wanted funds for marketing. Right? It seems reasonable until I asked the tough questions. Number one, I asked, how many years out of those 8 years has the company been profitable? Their answer, 0. Of those years, how many times did the owner actually take money out for the work they did? Their answer, 0. I asked, how much do they have currently in loans and debt that they have to pay other people? Their answer, $450,000. I said, what collateral is being held against that? They said, their home. Okay. That's a very poor picture. Okay. Those are things that, and they had not been honest or aware or as forthcoming with their spouse. But in literally 7 to 10 minutes, I knew exactly the next step they had to do, which is a hard step to do. But it was, getting pretty serious that they were overextended on the risk and that they had to scale it back or they were going to lose their home.
Woo! So now we've scared the crap out of everybody, Kedma.
No. I'm saying this because, I care, right? But
absolutely.
But this is the.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, anytime you're talking about starting a business and funding a business and possibly bringing in debt to fund a business, it's nice to have cautionary tales to keep it in perspective.
Right.
And you're talking about shared vision with your spouse. Those are all relevant conversations to funding your startup. but also funding your growth. Because I think that sometimes so on the one hand, we're talking about being risk averse, but we're talking about entrepreneurs. Sometimes we feel like we have bulletproof vests on. Like, hey, this is successful. I can do anything now. And now my entrepreneurial ADD is kicking in. So I'm going to try all these different things with my business and forget the one part of my business that was working, and then sink it into another division that's not working, but it's costing you way more capital to do. Hello, guilty. This guy right here.
And it's true. And two things I want everyone listening. This is so important. Number one, you are no longer permitted to compare yourself to any other firepreneur. This is an individual decision, because if I told you that you had to compare yourself to 5 other people starting their company, I'd have to look at all their variables and they have to be equal. That means how many kids are in the home, what is their spouse doing for a living, where are they located, how much time they have available. So please, I want to make it really clear. You are only competing against the best version of yourself, not against other people. That's really important. Really important, because people fall into this need to compete, which is not conducive. The second thing that's really important is you are not required to quit your job as a fireman or firewoman to do this business. I disagree with anyone who makes that statement. Anybody who has told you skin in the game, quit everything and jump in, run from.
Absolutely.
I disagree with that decision. And I want to make sure that I'm clear that I am not telling you to do that. And in many cases, if you do that, it's going to be counterproductive when it comes to funding.
Well said, because that is something you will see regularly, like especially in like small groups or Facebook pages. You'll get the keyboard warriors, as Josh Latimer calls them, which I think is funny because it's so true, because all of a sudden they know everything, and then they'll tell you like, "Hey man, you got to quit your job. You got to go full time and do this." It's like you said, it's different for each person. You can't.
It's different for each person.
How can you say that definitively? And I think anytime somebody tells you definitively you have to do this, you should immediately like not listen to them and move on.
Right. Yeah. Because information is not free. If you take that information and you base your decision on that, there's a cost.
Yeah. Okay, let's get into another question about funding.
Let's do it.
So you talked about debt, and I think there's tons of really smart people that talk about debt all the time. Personal debt, consumer debt, and then there's business debt, there's assets, there's equipment. So let's get into a firepreneur world here. I know a lot of my buddies that are firefighters that cut grass, and they're buying equipment. They're buying a truck, a trailer. They're pulling a few mowers. They got equipment. So talk to me about the difference between taking out a loan to buy equipment versus taking out a loan for working capital. And then if you could talk about good debt versus bad debt, if there is such a thing.
There's definitely such a thing. So good debt, I love good debt. So I'm going to give you an example. In 2008, I bought good debt. I bought my own commercial space, 6% down, valued at $800,000. And for the last, 12 years since 2008, it's been fixed. My interest is fixed at 0.04%, not 4%, 0.04%. Okay.
0.04%.
That's less than 0.5% interest on a property that's valued at $800,000, and my mortgage is $1,200 a month. On top of that, I lease the entire space and I get double what my mortgage payment is.
So an income producing asset.
Income producing asset at an interest rate that is truly grant driven. There's no other way to say it. There is no one I doubt anybody can compete at that level unless they have a family member who's going to give them less than 0.04%. That is good debt because that asset is building. Other good debts are things you may not even be thinking about. But if you invest in an education platform, you and I came from Conquer. If you invest in any education platform and that education teaches you the tools and the trade for building the business successfully, then that is an investment. That's good debt. There's a debt to pay, but it was worth it, right? So my degree, I have a master's in business. Not many people can say this. I can. I use my degree every single day in my line of work. every single day. So that's good debt. If I got my degree in biology, I probably would not be using it every single day, right?
Right.
That probably would not be considered good debt for me. Third is exactly what you said. Any kind of equipment, any kind of vehicle. It's good debt only if it's used to make the sales you need.
Right.
If it's sitting there, seriously, I have a guy right now who I just did an assessment with, and they have a truck sitting that they're not using, and they're paying $1,000 a month in insurance. They're not using the equipment for one reason or another. I don't know if it was broken or something like that. I said, well, that's not good debt.
All right.
Fix the truck or get rid of the insurance. Okay. To me, bad debt usually is associated with a large amount of cash that you have to pay a high interest. Hard lenders. I've looked at some financials where, I have people paying back credit cards or hard lenders, sometimes as high as 30% interest.
Oh.
I am dead serious. And that is very dangerous. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't, sometimes you run into a situation where you need something like that, for 30 days. 30 days, you can survive it. 5 years? No way.
Right.
So one thing we want to make sure we're clear on is anytime you have something that is going to better your business, if it's something like an asset, it's always good. But if it's something like that is hard to quantify, like education, as long as it's bettering your business and you can show the metrics, I put that in good debt. What I put in bad debt is when you're in a situation where you're using money that's costing you 3, 4, or 5 times what the market generally is, but usually that's as a result of something that may be out of your control at the time. You don't have strong credit, you don't have collateral, you're a startup and you're risky. And so sometimes it's appropriate to use bad debt, but I would say short term and limited.
So
does that make sense?
Absolutely. So the follow-up question I have for you here is like, you will listen to, and this again goes back to surrounding yourself with who you surround yourself can really impact your decision making. So if you're around somebody who says, hey, I built my business and I had to run up credit card debt to get it going, and I maxed out 3 credit cards, every one that came in the mail, I opened it up to fund the business because I didn't have any money, and I did that. And you hear these stories. If you listen to podcasts like How I Built This, I mean, some of these big mammoth companies, that's how they got started.
Right.
Airbnb, like some of these big companies. So I think it's also important to keep in perspective, like who you take your advice from, because what's missing there is the context. So that can be a slippery slope when you're surrounding yourself with people that say, well, run up your credit cards, right? But on the other hand, there's another piece of advice that can be conflicting as well, which is you should never have any debt ever. You should always cash flow your business. And I think that could be really good advice. But again, it comes down to context, because it also demands, what is your end in mind? What goal do you want to get to? Because if your goal is I want to be a 7-figure business in 5 years, but I'm going to cash flow everything and I clean windows. The math is the path then, right? Then it becomes conflicting because you might have to take some risk and fund some equipment. So those are examples on both sides of the extreme. So where do you weigh in on that?
Well, let me tell you, having done this for 20 years, I can tell you the horror stories for people who have put too much into going too fast, too quickly, where they had pie in the sky attitude. And guess what? They're out of business. They're out of business. Okay. One of my favorite stories prior to me purchasing my own office is I walked into about 2,000 square foot office years and years ago. And I swear to you, Bennett, it looked like the Ritz-Carlton. I was like, wow. I mean, TV set up, couches that were plush, state-of-the-art computer. And I just couldn't believe the place I was like, it was absolutely stunning. And I remember talking to the CEO and I was like, wow, like this is amazing, how you were able to, invest all this. And then he said, oh, I put it on my credit card. He was out of business in 6 months.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Now, when I started my first business, my first office, don't laugh, but I have to tell you so it makes it really clear. I started my first one. I rented my first office, which was 350 square feet. And I was so nervous because I wasn't sure if I would pay the rent that I brought in one of my other colleagues and split the office. And I only had 175 square feet. And my landlord came to me and said, Kedma, if you can't pay 175 square feet, you're not going to make it here. I'm like, I'm going to be able to do it. It was $150 a month. Okay. That's how conservative I am. But I went from 150 then to 300 and to, 500 and then 2000 and I finally bought my building, my office. So I am very conservative, but at the end of the day, if you're going to invest debt, I have to see the numbers at the end. If we're going to buy that equipment, if we're going to invest in that commercial property, I just want to know by investing how much more money you're going to make in the business. And it's a numbers game. It really is.
Let me take one more question at you real quick.
Okay.
I know you got to run. We're all grateful for your time and I'm going to be respectful for your time because I know you have meetings after this, but
I do.
In Conquer, which is the program that you are the VP of coaching in,
yes,
you have met other firepreneurs. And
yes.
Of those firepreneurs, what is a common obstacle that you see them facing and how can you help them overcome it?
It's a great question. The first is they feel that they're not doing enough because they are not in the business full time. And I want them to know that they don't have to be in the business full time to make it profitable. They're actually in a better position because they've diversified the income they're doing. And while many people just jump in, they're not getting the salary that they did when they were in, as a fireman or as any other situation. So that's the first thing. It's their own ego or uncomfortability because they're hearing other conquerors doing it full time. The second thing is that they're control freaks. We're all control freaks. But I like to say every entrepreneur I've met is a control freak. And they have to learn how to let go of certain things, which requires them to create the system and hire the right team and not be involved in all the nitty gritty stuff. So because their time is limited, they have to be really very, very cautious in where they're spending their time and energy. And they have to have the right team in place. So that's the second thing that really comes up a lot for the firepreneurs that I work with.
Really good stuff. Coach K, so tell us how, because I know that after people hear this episode, they're going to have lots of questions and there's going to be people maybe Facebook stalking you, coming on LinkedIn, trying to add you. So how can we get a hold of you if anybody wants some help, wants some guidance? How can people get in touch with you?
So first thing is I want people to know that you can just jump on to a form we put together, bit.ly/target funds. So it's super easy, bit.ly/target funds. And you can fill that out. And what I will do on your behalf, no cost to you, I will literally take that information, set up a time to chat with you, and I will go ahead and see if I can support any kind of funding for you because I work with over 60 lenders behind the scenes of what I do. So that's one way. The second way is you definitely want to connect with me on LinkedIn because I know a lot of people. And so I will be more than happy to support any introduction for what you're doing. And then the third way is, you can definitely reach out through Bennett because we are in touch a lot, or you can just hop on to Conquer, which is just my first and last name, www.kedmaough.com. And if you're interested, you can also look at my book, Target Funding, which talks about every kind of grant available in the business funding world.
Yep. So if you want to take a deeper dive on all the funding, Kedma's book is amazing. I bought it, read it. I recommend it. Coach K, we're so grateful for your time. Thank you. That wraps up the Target Funding episode. Forming your startup was last episode. We just funded our startup. Next is Dan Plata. We're going to talk about what numbers to know from day one. Coach K, be safe out there in Oregon. Stay away from the fires.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining Firepreneurs today. We hope that we delivered value in your leadership journey. We humbly ask that you take the time to leave us a 5-star review, as that's how our podcast will rise in rankings and become available to more people. We'd love to hear from you, so you can email us by emailing firepreneurs@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or by watching us on our Firepreneurs YouTube channel. Stay hungry and get after it.